G'day, welcome to Moona and the very first house I lived in Hobart. I came here as a 20-year-old, very enthusiastic. It was going to change the world, and in many ways some of the most challenging moments of my life happened as I was here, as I discovered that things were not quite as simple as I thought they might be. As a church, we're taking some time to look at what does it mean to find the story that God has for you. We've started this journey a few weeks ago as we looked at the incredible truth that you are created in the image of God. We then moved to look at the really helpful and, in my view, very important framework of the glory of God and how that helps us make sense of living in a broken world. Last week we looked at what it means to seek first the kingdom of God. And today we want to get a little bit more practical. With those frameworks in place, we want to look at the fact that there are really three broad stages of life as you work out your purpose, and many of the questions you need to face will be different depending on what stage of life you are at. Now, in the first stage, which is really from childhood right the way through to young adulthood, you are really on the journey of discovery. We're going to talk more about it, but I still remember what it was like for me. I had, at age 18, really didn't know what I wanted to do. Some people said I was good with words, so I thought I'd try journalism. And I applied to study journalism at university. I went to the university. It was hard to get in and my marks weren't great. And they said, you're more likely to get in if you've got some work experience. So I went and did some work experience in Broken Hill and at a commercial radio station there. And they offered me a job. And the choice of having a job and becoming a journalist, at the commercial radio station or going to university was fairly straightforward for me. So I spent a couple of years in Broken Hill. After that, I started to want to take my journey with faith seriously. I got baptized out in Broken Hill and went and did the Bible college course that Fusion ran. And then came here in Hobart and really was, like many Bible college students, full of great ideas, but hit the disillusionment of reality pretty quick. And it was a really challenging time. What was true, though, for me right the way through that whole time, although I had physically left home, I had not actually left home. My heart was still deeply connected with my parents and my family, and I was still, in many ways, on the journey to become an individual, to become separate from my family, to work out who I was. The author who has really framed a lot of my thinking around this is a bloke by the name of Gordon Smith. And what he says, if you're in this early phase of your life, through to sort of mid-adulthood, the primary task you have, the central question for young and emerging adults, is whether they will grow into the capacity to take personal and adult responsibility for their lives. Your task is to actually leave your parents and assume the responsibility of your own life. And it's really important, as it was for me, to try on different things, to try on different roles and gradually learn things. At this stage of your life, it's important not to close your options down so much, but to be open to what God is showing you. I don't know if it worked this way for you, but I still remember the moment I actually left home. My family came down to Tasmania for Christmas. We stayed in Launceston. I had shown them my place here in Moona, and we had a wonderful Christmas time together. But I kind of knew that God was calling me to stay here in Hobart, and I've shared for you the challenge I had up at Mount Wellington, and that had all happened prior to this. I had come down here to do a 6-month placement, But at the end of that Christmas time in 1992, the start of 1993, I remember thinking, oh, it's right for me to stay, and waving my parents off on the Incat catamaran that used to go between Georgetown and Geelong, I think, from memory. And I just remember the deep sense of grief I had as I waved my family goodbye. It was like I knew I was leaving home. This moment of leaving home has got nothing to do with whether you are living with your parents or not. I'm absolutely sure it's possible to live with your parents and still take responsibility for your own life. And I also know that it's entirely possible not to live with your parents and be 50 or 60 years old and still be having your life defined for you by your parents, and even if your parents have passed on, by your memory of your parents. The journey of each one of us on this journey of stepping into the calling that God has for us is to step into the adventure with just us and Jesus. We will need fellowship with other people, which we've already talked about, but the weight of responsibility for our lives is on our shoulders. As it says in the book of Galatians, each one of us has to carry our own load. As we take this journey and look at this in the Bible, I'm going to trace the story of David, because he's one of the few characters in the Bible we see from childhood all the way through to old age. And one of the things that is absolutely true is if you're open to God and you're in this early stages of working out your journey, God will take you through a range of experiences that prepare you for the job He has for you. And we see as David leaves his home to go to the battlefront and sees the battle that is in front of the Israelites, as Goliath stands up there and makes fun of them, we see that one of the defining moments for David is the battle he chooses to fight. One of the defining moments for me was the battle I chose to fight, to say, I believe God has called me here to Hobart, to be with Him in Hobart. One of the things that enables you to leave home is the battle you choose to fight. But as we said, God prepares you for that battle. And as David goes to Saul, and you'll see that there in 1 Samuel 17, Saul says to him, "Don't be stupid, you're just a kid, you can't do this." David said, I've been with God looking after the sheep, and I've had to fight lions and I've had to fight bears. If I can handle a lion or a bear, I can handle this fella. And you watch, as God brings you battles you need to fight, He will have taken you through other battles that prepare you for the battle that's in front of you. Saul then tried something. He says, okay, well, if you're going to do it, you can do it my way. Here's my armor. And one of the dangers for people in this early phase is you take on too much the persona and the armor of other people. And David tries it on, but it just doesn't fit right. So he says, no, I can't do it that way. That's not me. And some of the most important moments of your life will be where you say, no, that's not me. Where you can define who you are from who other people are. And then he goes out and he fights the battle. And in some of the most important moments of your life, it is just going to be you and Jesus. And as you step into some of those battles, you'll find that you get stronger, and the purpose that God has for you gradually comes into focus. Now, in a moment, we're going to take some time to discuss around our tables what our experience of this has been. Are we still in the journey to leave home? You may have left home 40 or 50 years ago. We want to talk about what that experience was like. But before we do, and after each of the three phases we talk about of finding your story today, I want to just some things to think about. So if you're in this first phase, can I say that the journey you're going to be on is to take responsibility of your own life. You need to appreciate your family, to appreciate the good things about your family, and no family was perfect. So you need to appreciate and understand the places in which your family weren't perfect. But it is, as the Galatians says, it is your task to carry your own load. In addition to that, in this phase of your life, don't feel like you have to make, big lifelong decisions about career paths and that kind of thing. One of the things we know is for young people growing up today, many of the careers that will open up to them haven't even been invented yet. That it is more than likely that you won't yet know what the trajectory of your life is going to be. So don't be in a rush to try and narrow it down. Be open and let it emerge. Some people do know very early on, that they want to be a teacher or a doctor and that's fine. But if you don't yet know, don't panic. It's a good time at this stage of your life to keep your options open. Similarly, it's really important at this stage of your life to be friends with people who are not like you. I am so grateful for Warren Mills, who taught me how to service a car, and for Neil, who took me shooting, and another Neil who gave me my first job mowing lawns, and for a whole lot of people who, young people who my dad was caring for became really good mates. Students in the Fusion movement became really good mates as I grew up. I'm grateful for the people who were not like me. And as it is just so important at this stage of your life, not to limit yourself to people who think and talk and act like you, because you don't yet know who you are. And you need to have friends who are different to you and who call you out and challenge you. Similarly, take time to get to know yourself. Work out, have a try of things, and see. Your task is to learn what are the gifts and skills God's given you. Watch in this phase of your life for the promises that God gives you. It's often in this stage of your life, God will give you promises that will be about the future, and you might even understand what they're about. I really had no idea what the whole thing about Wellington and Hobart was about. Little did I know, as I ultimately left Hobart, that I'd be coming back and that I'd be a pastor. I had no idea about that. I still remember times people would talk to me about, having a ministry overseas, and I had no idea what that was about. Or in a journal saying, I feel called to be a pastor. I wrote that in here. I'd never even thought about church ministry, and I just assumed that was some sort of artificial kind of thing. But it really was about being a pastor. So watch for the promises God gives you. Don't put on other people's armour, and look out for the battles that are right for you to fight, because your battles will help you become you. So there's some things to keep in mind for if you're at this stage of life. I want to just take a moment now to move into our discussion time. And this is the discussion question. Do you remember a moment where you stopped relying on your parents and accepted full responsibility for your life? I talked a little bit about what that moment was like for me. What was it like for you? And if you haven't done that, that's fine. Just share that. But around the tables and in your discussion groups, just take a moment. What was it like? What is the journey of leaving home? What was it like? And what did you learn? And is there anything still for you to learn from that time? Thanks, Em. It's very loud. We're talking about what does it actually mean to find the story God has for you, and we were just singing about it. Hebrews 12 says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and there's this beautiful picture that's just talked in Hebrews chapter 11 about some of the witnesses, the people that have gone before us. And for me, that also brings to mind a whole lot of very special people. My mate Phil, my grandfather, my mate Bob. I don't know who that brings to mind for you, but no, there's all these people whose story on this side of eternity is done, but they're in the grandstands cheering us on. And what they are saying to us is what Jesus is saying to us. Let's run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Do you know there is a race marked out for you? And your main task to run that race, according to the writer of Hebrews, is to fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So in the first, we were just talking about in the first stage of your life, the sort of teenage to mid-adult years, your job is to leave home and to take responsibility for your life. And it's not a simple stage. It is really a journey of grief in some ways as you leave the comfort of a world where everything's given to you on a plate, but also have to come to terms with also the weaknesses of your parents. To be able to define yourself and understand, although everybody here, your parents did the best they knew how, and unless your name's Garvin, they weren't perfect. No, that's not true. Even if your last name's Garvin, your parents, as you well know, are not perfect. And you've got to work that out and work yourself out. So that's that first journey we were talking about. Now, let's talk about the journey from kind of the mid-adult years through to the 60s, kind of the senior years. It's a different kind of journey. It is a journey of the first journey is a journey of exploration and working out who you are. This second phase of the journey is a journey of letting go and accepting the limits and possibilities that are uniquely yours. It's a journey of letting go and accepting the limits and the possibilities that are uniquely yours. So, anyone had a moment where they realised they weren't going to play Test cricket for Australia? I still coming to terms with that one. There's deep grief as I realised that the whole Australian cricket team was younger than me. This is weird kind of moment. Do you have those kind of moments where you start to realise the fantasies I had are no longer possible? And increasingly, you have to, every choice you make about your life, in order to say yes to something, you need to say no to something. I still remember sitting at my desk thinking, am I going to do this when it came to writing my book and starting a blog talking about faith? Because I knew that if I became although I'd been working with a Christian mission organisation, we'd been working in the homeless sector and that kind of stuff, and I could, if I wanted to, pass that off as not-for-profit work, and you could get a job in sort of not-for-profit management or that kind of thing. But I knew that as I started to put myself out there as a follower of Jesus and started to put that on the internet and stuff, I knew I was cutting off my options. And this stage of life is a stage of cutting off your options. If you choose to get married, you are choosing to cut off your options. The challenge we live in a society that says don't cut off your options. Keep your options open. And so what that means is we have a whole lot of people who don't grow up because they're not cutting off their options. They're not saying yes to things and no to other things. Galatians 6 says, if anyone thinks they're something when they're not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions, then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. This is an important one for me. I love that just before this, he also says we should carry one another's burdens. There are burdens that we need to carry together. You will not find your story on your own. But at the same time, if you're waiting back for somebody else to tell you what your story is, if you're waiting back for somebody else to sort out your problems, you will never move forward. Your task is to accept the burden of your own life, to accept the burden of your own challenges. And this guy who I'm quoting a little bit, he wrote a book called Courage and Calling, and I found it really helpful. He talked about the different stages and some of the wrestles of it. And what he said is, at this stage of life, I'm suggesting that we're wise to recognise that by our mid-30s, the challenge of being true to ourselves
represents unique choices we cannot afford to ignore. So the central question from your mid-30s to your probably mid-60s are the essential: are you going to make the tough choices to be you? For only as we accept and become completely ourselves without pretense, envy, or illusion are we able to give ourselves fully to God and others in generous service. It's also true that in this stage of life, most of us will experience crises, setbacks, and pain, where it feels like the whole world is imploding. And it feels like you can't quite see how to move forward. I know for me, there's been several moments like that. And I find helpful just to put myself in David's place. As he's done this incredible stuff. He's led the armies in a battle. He's, secured Jerusalem. He's had incredible success. But he completely stuffed up. He had what is technically called a brain fart, which I don't think is, something you should talk about in polite company. But he had a moment where his brain, went somewhere else, and he went for Bathsheba. And this was a crisis of his own making. Many of the crises you have will not be of your own making. Many of the crises you have will not be of your own making. Many of them will. But I love Psalm 51, where in that context David says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God." And this is the prayer of this stage of your life. With all the options in front of you, Jesus, help me to want what you want. Create in me a pure heart and renew a steadfast spirit within me. You can, from your mid-30s through to your mid-60s, just bounce all over the place and not make choices. To have your world determined for you by external circumstances. Generally what will happen is you'll hit a bit of a crisis around the age of 30, then you'll hit a bigger crisis around the age of 40, and if you don't deal with it then, you'll hit an even bigger crisis around the age of 50. As your spirit says to you, come on, let's stop playing games. Let's take this journey seriously. These beautiful words of David: don't cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. The central question of this phase of your life is, are you on this adventure with Jesus? Are you? Who's setting the agenda? There are going to be all kinds of ups and downs in your life. But at this stage of your life, your job is to have the courage to say no to the right things so you can say yes to the right things. Some things to remember in this stage of life. That the journey you're on, and by the way, the sermon notes for this are in the YouVersion Bible app. If you just click on events there, you'll find them. It's important to accept yourself for who you are. And this is a lifelong journey, isn't it? Because we've got all kinds of forces telling us what we should be in order to be okay. And Jesus is saying, no, be you. You don't have to put on an act. Be you. Accept who you are, including your limits. Come to terms with the fact you're not going to play for the Australian Test team. Or, dance in the Australian Ballet, or, be in a Hollywood movie, or start whatever it was for you. Come to terms with your limits, but learn to enjoy who you are. In this phase of your life, it's really important not to mistake your employment for your calling. Your calling won't change, but you'll express it in lots of different ways. Your employment is not your vocation. In this stage of life, you'll be saying no. If you are heading on the journey with Jesus, he will take you to times and places where increasingly you need to say no to the right stuff so you can say yes to the right stuff. In this stage of life, it's really important not to spend your life measuring yourself against others. It's in this stage of life, it's important to make choices to be continually learning. One of the saddest things is when somebody doesn't live 70 full years but lives the same year 70 times. Learn continually. Hold on. In the failure you will face, the tragedy you will face, the setbacks you will face, hold on to Jesus and hang on, and ultimately it will be okay. It's him writing your story, not you. And often the most horrible moments, somehow he is able to turn into something beautiful for the kingdom. Even, and it makes no sense, but this is, well, I get this from the great theologian Bono, where the song Grace, where it says, grace finds beauty in ugly things. And it's so true. If you hang on and don't let the ugly things define you. And the final thing to be conscious of in this stage of life is this is where it is just critical. When you're young, up to about the age of 25, you can get away with, eating whatever you feel like eating and, working, 50 hours a day, which is incredible. You can get away with stuff that you cannot get away with. It's not healthy to do that. But by the time you're about 30, 35, you need to have established healthy patterns of rest and Sabbath. Getting some of those healthy patterns of rest and Sabbath in place so that you can take time out and say, hey, Jesus, are we heading in the right direction or not? If you don't have those patterns of rest, it's possible you'll wake up and it'll be 10 years later. So that's that phase of life. Up through till about kind of the mid-60s. As you hit kind of the mid-60s onwards, from sort of mid-adulthood to our senior years, it's important for you to understand no matter how old we are, we still have a calling. And we don't lose or even really change vocation. David and Maureen are heroes for me. Part of their calling has been to be pastors. They're not actually employed as pastors anymore, but for those who know them, wouldn't you agree they're still pastors? Much more than me often. Like, I am learning so much. Can you see how, for me, they're exhibit A of, while your employment may change, your vocation doesn't change. I see Morris in Adelina Valley, who God shaped him as an engineer, and he's always trying to work out how to organise us as a church and organise things. He is continually engineering things. And that's part of how God's wired him. And Chris, who's her whole life is kind of the glue and connects with people. And I don't know exactly what her vocation is, but I'm sure it's something to do with people. Your employment changes, your vocation doesn't. And there will be two primary jobs you have. There'll be two primary jobs you have. As you ordinarily, in this stage of your life, step out of organisational power structures, not all the time, but often, you begin to lead through influence. And there are two gifts we need from you in this stage of your life. We need your wisdom, and we need your blessing. We need your wisdom and we need your blessing. Gordon Smith says, the temptation in this stage of life is to assume that those who follow us are not as committed, not as dedicated, not as good as we are. We so easily bemoan the next generation. It's easy to do, isn't it? When you see the young people coming through, you know, we had some better days. You know, we knew how to do things around here. We so easily bemoan the next generation, which seems not to maintain our values. But those who bemoan the next generation grow more bitter, angry, disappointed, and cynical. Those who bless not only grow old with grace and joy, but also have a disproportionate influence on the generation that comes. There is a time to judge, a time to assess, and a time to critique. But the power of blessing is so great that I wonder if we lose the right to judge the older we get. And part of why I wonder that is that I'm so convinced of the power of blessing. Aren't you so grateful for some of the people in this phase of life amongst us who bless? And we are in a world of young parents who are alone and needing people to come around and bring wisdom and blessing. We are a church that needs more of it. We need more of your wisdom and your blessing. And this is how you express your vocation in this stage of life. We see David actually acknowledging the fact that the generation coming behind him won't have what his understandings. I love, he organises himself to create a platform for the generation coming behind. He says, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence and fame and splendour in the sight of all the nations. Therefore I will make preparations for it. So David made preparations not for his calling, but for Solomon's calling. And his last words to Solomon were, I'm about to go the way of all the earth, so be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go. So here's some things to remember in the senior years of your life. Remember, there is no retirement in the kingdom of God. Sorry about that. There is only reassignment. There is no retirement in the kingdom of God. There is only reassignment. The senior years can actually be the time where you have the most freedom to pursue the things that God puts on your heart. So go for it. There is nothing holding you back from pursuing the calling that God has on your life. The senior years, as we're saying, are a time often of stepping away from formal structures of power. But you watch. As you bring your wisdom and your blessing, you will end up with more influence than you probably had in the earlier years of your life. And the two primary responsibilities you have amongst us are to bring your wisdom, we need it, and to bring the blessing. A helpful way of thinking about it is the difference between a parent and a grandparent. The parent has to deal with the fact the kid's not going to eat the food, and they're going to just want to eat sugar, and and just wants to stay on their screen the whole time. And the grandparent gets to bring their wisdom and bring their blessing, and doesn't have to bring the discipline. We need more grandparents. We need more grandparents in the church and in our society. So in summary, as we pull this together, and in a minute the band will come and sing, and I don't know where you are on this stage, but it's probably good to be thinking about where you are and what it means. For young adults, your task in life at the moment is to be on the journey to take responsibility for your own life. For adults in the middle of life, your task is to accept yourself for who you are, for better or worse. And for senior adults, your task is to let go a bit so you can bless and offer wisdom. In the first phase, it's about discovery. In the second stage, it's about where you're focusing. And in the third stage, it's about learning to be a blessing and bringing your wisdom. But as we said, in each stage of life, you will find your story as you stop worrying about your story and start worrying about Jesus. And make the difficult choices he brings in front of you. In each stage, there will be griefs you have to face if you're going to grow up. There will be challenges you need to face if you're going to grow up. But Jesus promises, if we give up our life for his sake, that's where we find our life. Jesus, help us. Help us be open to all you have for us. Help us be the kind of friends to each other that encourage us to grow into the story we have for us and not to avoid it. We acknowledge we need your help. None of us gets it right all the time in this area, that's for sure. We need you, Jesus. In your name, amen.